mankind is but one species amongst millions on our planet, and our well-being depends on this very variety of life. Perhaps the beginning of a new millennium is a fine opportunity to reflect on humanity's relationship with the rest of life on Earth. It's biodiversity. The issue of biodiversity has steadily moved up the conservation agenda over the past more than 50 years. Are natural ecosystems and species essential to our own survival? Are we destroying them? And if so, what will be the consequences?
For a long time, conservation of biological diversity had been called upon, in particular by the scientists and scientific bodies in the world. And for the majority of the world, we recognize that also, whereby we are not only talking about the conservation of living organism, but also the right to development, and that is the right of countries with this biological diversity to use it in a sustainable manner.
Mankind does nothing fundamentally different from other organisms in using Earth's resources. But with our sophisticated societies and technologies, mankind is extraordinarily successful at not only using but also abusing the Earth's resources. Today, extinction rates are 100 to 200 times higher than normal, and whole biomes are polluted and fragmented.
After the fall of the Soviet Union, perhaps commitments were thus entered into by the industrialized countries, by the wealthier countries, that they would make money available, and all that was needed was commitment on the part of developing countries to conserve and use biological diversity sustainably. It turns out to be a mere illusion of the time. Neither peace nor the commitment have materialized. The world is more troubled than ever, and peace is not around.
Efforts are on to collect data from a variety of sources on biodiversity. In the year 1999, World Conservation Monitoring Center, Cambridge, came out with an illustrative document called Global Biodiversity.
This book, for the first time, is really putting humanity, humankind, into the context of all the rest of life on Earth. It looks at how mankind developed historically, evolutionarily, how mankind became a part of nature, how through technology, through development of human societies, we began to control the rest of nature.
All species and individuals within an ethnic group have a finite lifespan. Thus, changes in biodiversity are inevitable. Accelerated and progressive reduction in diversity of the species and ecosystem level, however, is not only intrinsically undesirable, but poses a significant threat to human material welfare. It implies reduced ability of ecosystems to sustain key products and services.
Now we realize the intimate relationships among cultural diversity, spiritual traditions, and biodiversity. But the very important role of community conservation, people conserving material over a long period of time, the flora, the fauna, the whole ecosystem, was not given that recognition, nor did it receive any reward at all.
It has been a concern of many people that biodiversity must be appreciated in terms of human diversity. Different cultures and ethnic groups perceive biodiversity in different ways as a consequence of their distinct customs, traditions, and experiences. Global Biodiversity Assessment by the United Nations Environment Programme has estimated the total number of species existing on the Earth to be in the range of 13 to 14 million. Out of these, only about 1.75 million have been identified and recorded so far. Even this is a huge number. Does this natural bounty exist in vain?
When we talk about resources, the next word that we always use in relation to them is exploitation. I think it's time to change that attitude of resources and exploitation. Our relationship to the environment has to be much more friendly. We have to understand how we can live with it. We can use the elements of the environment, but we cannot abuse them.
Biodiversity has always been a part of our daily living. It constitutes the resources on which families, communities, nations, and future generations depend. But no resource is unlimited ever. The kind of indiscriminate plunder biodiversity has been subjected to throughout the history of the human race would empty even the biggest of treasure houses.
We feel that conservation is not a technical issue, it's a social and economical issue, and it will be solved in the long run if we can incorporate biodiversity into the economics of the country.
We today have more biodiversity available to us than ever before. If you go to a supermarket in Delhi, you can buy things from Africa, or you can get rice from Thailand if you want it, or you can get soybeans from North America, or you can get maize that originated in Central America. You have access to this because of global trade. But global trade also threatens biodiversity if it is not done in a sustainable way.
At the broadest level, biodiversity loss is aggravated by economic systems. Policies that fail to assess properly the environment and its resources on the one hand, and the legal and institutional systems that promote unsustainable exploitation of natural resources on the other.
Conquerors always wanted access. They went somewhere else and said, I want access. I have, for some reason, because I have superior military, superior knowledge, superior geography, I want access. There was access to lands, access to minerals, and now it's access to genetic resources.
If nothing else, the biodiversity debate of the last few decades has taught us that life is a mosaic of biological forms, webs of interrelated niches, and myriad ecosystems.
About the biodiversity and how it has been implemented, I think the Nordic countries, all in all, has a quite long tradition on, for instance, the legislation part. We have the Nature Conservation Act was adopted already in 1927, and we renewed it now totally 1996, where the aim, the first paragraph already talks about the biodiversity and the nature and the heritage.
That biodiversity is actually the survival of humanity as a whole. Without it, we cannot survive. We will have no medicine, we will have no food, we will have climatic disasters, we will have floods, we will have droughts. So, protecting it is a national agenda. It is an agenda of the security of the country. It's no less than that, really. If you don't have enough food, there is no point in having the best army in the world.
The Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 was a watershed event in the history of environmental protection. It rang out alarm bells loud enough to be heard all over the world and inspired a number of treaties to promote awareness and conservation of nature worldwide. Its ramifications can now be felt as concerns about conservation have been taken to the doorstep of the common man, including indigenous communities living in forests.
One of the things which has come to many people's attention is the role of indigenous people, both as guardians and in users of biodiversity. The voice that indigenous people have and their participation in the decisions which affect their lives are increasingly becoming an issue.
Indigenous communities can loosely be defined as ethnic groups which have preserved the culture of a particular territory and protected it from the influence of colonizers and invaders. To that extent, they are usually isolated even from other communities within the same territory. They are generally not very influential in the political and economic power structure of their respective countries, but are determined to preserve their ethnic identity and pass it on to future generations.
I take particular satisfaction in the work of the indigenous peoples. Because the indigenous peoples, the ones who actually live on the ground, live closest to the biodiversity, are the ones who conserve biodiversity. They conserve it because it is in their interest to do so. They have developed knowledge over the many thousands of years where they have been living with these resources and have developed medicinal plants, have developed knowledge about how to live with wildlife in a productive way.
Most indigenous and traditional populations inhabit areas of mega biodiversity. The very origins of environment conservation lie buried in ancient cultures. Most of the modern environmental movements owe their ideology to such original belief systems, yet do not always repay their debt to their forebears.
It's a kind of different approach. There are certain things that are allowed to be given out, and there are certain things that you are not allowed to give it out in terms of making money on it, because indigenous peoples do have the relationship with the spirit. They also have relationship with the environment that they have. Anything that ties into the land, they do have, special kind of spiritual relationship, and that's what we believe. And by giving it out, we believe, like where I come from, the community I come from, we believe that if we give out something in order to generate income, that is an insult to the spirits.
It is now being realized that learning and reflecting on the ways of today's indigenous traditional peoples and integrating them into environmental and developmental considerations is essential for the survival of biodiversity. Here, the heritage of ancient forests has a major role to play.
Ancient forests are for us the most important terrestrial biodiversity. This is our choice as Greenpeace International, and we know that there are so many people living in forests, a lot of forest dwellers, indigenous peoples, and they are dependent on the forest, and the forest shouldn't be clear-cut. And we try to put pressure on governments to preserve the forests and to use them in a way that is consistent with the needs of the local peoples living in the forest.
Experience of the past few decades has revealed that as social and economic changes take place, patterns of consumption, production, and needs change, straining, altering, and even destroying ecosystems.
And so, for example, in my community, I used 2 trees. One tree was used for brewing beer. It gave them yeast. But when colonialists came, they banned the brewing of traditional beer so that they could introduce their own beer. And of course, that has remained so to this day. As a result, the local communities lost the use and the value of that tree, which has now become virtually extinct.
Take, for instance, curcuma longa, the yellow powder for making the rice yellow and also make beautiful curries. Women in India know that if the child scrapes the knee and there is a threat of infection, you mix it with oil, put it on the knee, and there will be no infection. So somebody comes and takes curcuma longa, watches the women, goes off and claims a patent on curcuma longa. Now, how will the women know? And secondly, how will it be established nationally that somebody living in India will know and will have a right to say, this is mine. I had prior knowledge. Why should your test tube be the only place where knowledge to be respected is generated? Why should it not be my oral tradition, what I learned from my mother, and why should it not my cooking pot?
Perhaps the most important area where human interaction with biodiversity is intrinsic is agriculture. A significant paradigm shift in the past few years has been the growing appreciation of the concept of agro-biodiversity. The recognition that biodiversity is essential for agricultural production, just as agriculture should be for biodiversity conservation. This may include all the components of biodiversity, flora and fauna, and microorganisms.
The issue of access to genetic resources for food and agriculture is a crucial issue. But the farmers have a view. They would like
to make sure that the resources that they have nurtured and developed over millennia cannot be privatized for private greed, private gain.
ITTG is one of several worldwide organizations working towards conservation of biodiversity in these threatened times. Over the years, ITTG has managed to rediscover over 40 such threatened varieties in Tharaka and East Kenya, with the help of local farmers to whom it provides assistance and training. The rediscovery of such seeds has not only resulted in the diversification of agricultural crops, but also helped the indigenous communities attain more nutrition in line with local climatic and geographical conditions.
Another area of high priority concerns for indigenous people concerns traditional knowledge and the protection of intellectual property rights. People in the developed world have evolved a structure through copyrights, through legal protections and so forth, to safeguard intellectual property. When you're not part of that structure, either because of isolation by distance or language or financial status, it's very difficult to exercise those rights. IBM or Monsanto has no difficulty protecting its copyright. A shaman from the northern part of the Amazon basin has extreme difficulty. He doesn't have access to the framework in which such rights are protected.
As in weaving, the intricate warp and web that make the fabric, when viewed closely, may not reveal the overall vision. The message of the weave is inherent in its intricacy and diversity, which can only be viewed from a distance. It is perhaps in this context that the role of international funding agencies becomes crucial.
Looking at the countries, especially from the Asia region, mega diverse countries. Almost all the countries in Asia have a lot of diversity and variety. And they have a lot of human capacity also. But in spite of it, many of the activities which are related to loss of biodiversity, if you look, they also are concentrated in Asia region. Sustainability is a major problem in Asia. Population is one of the reasons. The low economies are one of the reasons. Interestingly, what is happening is the Global Environment Facility is being looked upon as the most important financial mechanism. But this is not a sustainable kind of financing. Global Environment Facility can give you money for 3 years or 5 years. But later than that, it is your own country that who should get the money enough so that you can implement the activities.
Looking ahead, really, I think through the GEF and other international organizations and bilateral assistance, I think we're demonstrating that there are ways to address forest conservation, biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, even in the area of climate change, energy efficiency, renewable energy. And the effort now really must be focused on how it can become part and parcel of sustainable development thinking. That's why when you look at our portfolio, you find that while it's worth $8 billion, 3 billion of these were GF grants and the other 5 billion were in co-finance, because it's always trying to bring about the convergence of global environmental protection with sustainable development efforts. And because nature does not sectoralize, nature is always have links between all of these issues: land, water, biology, people, food, fish. All of these things are really related to one another, and you need to address them really in a holistic way.
Nature is not therefore a commodity to be bought, sold, or negotiated, precisely because nature is what defines humanity. The earth is our mother, and therefore cannot be compromised, sold, or monopolized. National strategies and plans for conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity are rooted in the long and rich spiritual and cultural traditions of a country. That is perhaps why countries in South Asia have a special role to play in this context.
Countries like India have a lot of traditional wisdom. I'll just take this particular case about the wound healing properties of turmeric. This has been known for centuries in India. But suddenly one day one found that there was an American patent that was granted on turmeric. This is wrong because this is known. And therefore we decided to fight this particular case by filing re-examination with the US Patent Office. Just as turmeric was the first let us say, victory, so as to say. Subsequently, there was neem that was bought in the European Patent Office, and then finally Basmati. I headed the technical team which actually put up the case for Basmati. We challenged some 3 claims, and US Patent Office actually disallowed 15 claims. I mean, that was very nice. But what all that has meant is that there is a wide awakening now as to why these wrong patents are being given. And therefore, to correct that situation, the concepts like traditional knowledge digital library have come. And just as India is going to do it, I'm sure China will do it, and Latin America will do it, Indonesia will do it, and this word will spread around.
India is in one of the 12 mega diversity regions of the world. Around 127,000 species of microorganisms, plants and animals have been catalogued in the country till date.
We feel that if there is a regulatory system in place where the person who is obtaining this knowledge declares the source from which he has obtained that knowledge, then it will not be easy for him to obtain a patent, and it will lead to reduction in biopiracy.
One of the most heartening developments in recent times has been the fact that the Indian government has finally managed to challenge the patent on Basmati. It should have been done long ago, because we have to send out a very powerful signal that we will protect our biodiversity, we will protect our indigenous knowledge, and that we will contest any claims that are made on what belongs to us.
India has a long history of conservation and the sustainable use of natural resources. But the ongoing attacks on biodiversity has affected India like the rest of the world. And the loss is not just physical or environmental, but it has social and cultural aspects too.
In the world of the 6,500 languages that UNESCO has identified, 2,500 are already near extinct. With that, the words that people use for rain, for the smell of soil, for characterizing different types of soil, this would be all lost.
The movement for environmental conservation must catalyze growth and improve the quality of life globally.
To give you an idea, about 74% of the plant-derived drugs are used for the same purpose for which native people had discovered their use. This is the degree of correlation between indigenous knowledge and the modern science. And yet, in none of these cases has anything gone back to the...
It is in this context and background that way back in 1976, Professor M.S. Swaminathan, the then Director General of Indian Council of Agricultural Research, Government of India, felt the urgent need to undertake an ethnobiological survey and study of the indigenous communities of the country, for recording and documenting the fast disappearing lifestyle, wisdom and knowledge of these people.
India is the first country in the world which has enacted an integrated legislation called the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. For example, we go on talking about medicinal plant. In nature, there are only plants, there are no medicinal plant. If you use the prefix medicinal, it means that is somebody's intellectual property. They have identified the medicinal value. This is why ethics and equity demand that we recognize the contributions and its ongoing contribution, past, present and future contributions, and help them to revitalize their in situ, on-farm conservation traditions.
Subsequently, Dr. T.N. Khoshu, the then Director, National Botanical Research Institute, had prepared a project proposal, the All India Coordinated Research Project on Ethnobiology. And Dr. P. Pushpangadan, then a scientist at the Regional Research Laboratory, was appointed as Principal Investigator and Chief Coordinator of this project.
And then we opened 27 centers in the country, and one center was at the southern India in Kerala. And I made a point to visit all the centers along with the team. I used to lead the team to the forest areas.
It was during a research trip to the state of Kerala in 1987 that a few scientists noticed something unusual. They found that Kani tribal folk guiding them through the jungle remained energetic and agile by eating a certain wild fruit. When Dr. Pushpangadan and his team of scientists were offered these fruits, they too felt a flush of energy and strength. Pleasantly surprised, They asked their escorts about the fruit, initially reluctant to disclose what they claimed was secret tribal knowledge. After much persuasion and assurance, the tribals told the scientists about the source of the fruit.
I rushed back to Jammu. I called a pharmacologist and told them that I want this fruit is supposed to be an anti-fatty. We put an experiment. We have a swimming test. So the mice, are put into a particular temperature, the water is heated. The control mice after 6 hours started collapsing, singing. Then we take it out. The one which was given the amphetamine, that was actually swimming almost 8, 9, 10 hours. But the one which was eaten these fruits, swimming for 18 hours, we are sitting midnight, late in the night, and I could not believe. I was thrilled. Immediately I said, we'll go for immediate detailed investigation. Then I called Dr. Rajasekharan, is an Ayurvedic man. I told him, look into your Ayurvedic test and see whether any mention is anywhere.
I asked him, what is this? Then he said, it is Arogya Pacha. The term itself, you see, Arogya Pacha. Arogya means health. Pacha means green.
After going through many ancient Indian medical texts, he realized that the plant was the same as one described as a divine plant in the scriptures.
If you look at the physical characters of this plant, it is totally resembling with Arogya Pacha. So these are all the two lines mentioned in that Charaka Samhita. Krishna Sarpa Swarupena Varahi Kanda Sambhava Ekapatra Mahavirya Bhinna Anjana Samaprabha. You see, Ekapatra, this is also a single type leaf, and Kanta Sambhava, this is also rhizomatous. And they said the therapeutic property as Mahavirya. You cannot assess the therapeutic efficacy. It may cause number of activities. So it is a duty of the Ayurvedic physician to decide for what purpose he has to use this plant.
The plant was subjected to pharmacognostical studies, phytochemical and ethnopharmacological screening, and toxicity studies including clinical pharmacology of herbal formation development from the plant. The results of the research conducted by them were most heartening. The Tribal Botanic Garden Research Institute at Thiruvananthapuram was then able to formulate a multi-purpose drug called Jeevani from it. The tribe continues to be benefited by the funds generated by the manufacture of this medicine. The TBGRI Kani tribe experiment shines like a beacon, showing how the traditional knowledge available in various parts of the world can be used for the benefit of mankind without disturbing the biodiversity. There is a need to prepare for any eventuality because of patent claims being made by some commercial agencies on natural products like neem, kukumalonga and even basmati rice. We have to be on our guard to protect the copyrights on such traditional knowledge, not because we want to monopolize it, but to make sure that this knowledge is not exploited unfairly by unscrupulous elements. Nature has distributed its bounty to mankind in a planned and balanced manner. A lot of damage has already been done to disturb this balance, but a new awareness has begun to spread over the past few years. Issues like conservation of biodiversity, access to traditional knowledge, the need to protect patents and benefit sharing with the indigenous communities need to be attended to urgently in the face of increasing exploitation of natural resources. We still have a lot of promises to keep which were made by our ancestors to the woods, lovely, dark and deep. But greed and predatory progress are dark and deep too. If proper checks are not initiated immediately, these dark demons will crush nature underfoot.